Hi guys, welcome back to our podcast. I'm Elise.
And I'm Dom.
Today we have a really special guest. She is truly one of the most inspiring just female entrepreneurs that we have ever met. Not only is she a partner at Counterculture, a creative agency that also houses a big roster of a lot of well-known influencers, she also started Common Ace, one of the fastest growing female footwear communities and marketplace. And to top it all off, she helped lead marketing and partnerships for major tech conferences like Startupfest, ran early startup programs with winning companies like Mejuri over a decade ago. And she did all of this while breaking barriers in very male-dominated industries. Welcome, Katherine.
Welcome.
Thank you, guys. What a nice intro. Wow. God.
We're like, how do we spotlight her so well? So when we wrote
so
that,
much, honestly, I need to take that as my bio that I bring places now.
Yeah. Well, we're so happy that you're here.
Thank you
And
for
I don't know
having
if
me.
everyone knows, this is our first guest.
Yeah.
So
I'm honored,
we were like, we went
honestly.
out all out, got a studio, everything. We start off every episode with Peak and Pit. So just kind of, for those that don't know, something that went really well last week, something that sucked, just kind of highlight the ups and downs that everyone goes through. So do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think my peak last week, I actually was in New York for a really exciting meeting that was with a big publishing house. I feel like I'll leave, when you're
You're
my
like, I
fingers are
can't
crossed a little bit, but
say.
it was just it was an opportunity that kind of knocked that you're like, oh, that's super exciting. And I think my pit is we were trying to get something launched for before the holidays that just with mail strikes and manufacturing and all of that is not happening, which was a little bit of a disappointment, but also just the realities of business. So it wasn't meant to be.
Okay. And the meeting that you had in New York, how long were you anticipating that for? Did it come out of the blue?
It actually came out of the blue. We are working on a cool collab with Common Ace that came through this really great agency out of Beverly Hills. And I got a call from her the week prior. And she said, hey, you're going to get a phone call from this publishing house. I put you forward for this opportunity. And I was like, oh, I don't know that I'm actually quite a fit for exactly what that is. And she was like, just say yes, it'll open up other opportunities, whatever. And I was in London actually at the time, and she was like, yeah, so it'll be next week. And I was like, okay, great. Tell me where I need to be.
So you were in New York for how long?
I was in New York for 3 days. I was there Wednesday through Saturday last week.
Okay,
So.
lovely.
Yeah. So it was,
Okay.
we'll see. I feel like sometimes in those opportunities when you feel like you're batting up a little bit, I did feel like I was like, I don't know. I think there's people who are probably more experienced than I am
Out of
who
your
might
weight
be
class.
better. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I-
honestly, sometimes I think you were meant to have that interview and that's just how it goes.
That's kind of what I feel. I'm always like, you gotta go. If you feel like you're a little bit out of your depth, you're moving in the right direction. I always feel like, so I was a little bit out of my depth. So we will see what comes out of that. But it was just one of those opportunities that you think to yourself, oh my God, 20-year-old me would be like, well, this is so cool.
Gagging over this.
Yeah.
She would be.
Because 31-year-old me is too. I'm like, so, yeah.
Cute. Very nice. Okay.
Okay, my peak and pit are more superficial.
No. I can do those too. Don't worry if that's what we.
My peak is Codily emailed me to be on their PR list.
Okay, but it was okay, I'm gonna give a background. Then it was the night before, her and I were on her couch. We're like, can you imagine if Codily reached out to one of us?
We
And we were
manifested it.
holding each other's hand. We're like, okay, now let's go home. And then literally the next day she sends it to me. She's like, get the fuck out. And she's like, Codily DM'd me. And I was like,
I love that. We love
Yeah.
Codily.
Oh.
The Resveratrol. So
Yes.
good.
This is what I'm saying, because I had never had their products before, and Dom got me on that product.
I went to France this year and I bought so much Codily because I the tax backs or whatever. I bought literally 6 of everything. And then I came back and I'm like, you have to use Codily. I've been using it for 2 years. It's very pricey. Here's 120 Canadian
Yeah.
for the retro thing. But anyways, I got her on and then
I
So
love
I'm just
that.
patiently waiting.
No, 100%. And I feel like when you're a loyalist, it pays off.
Well, I think I also don't have the follower count, so
it's so much less.
Thanks.
It's so much less about the numbers these days as it is about truly the community. It's 100 true fans theory. I'm just if you have 100 people that care about what you're doing, you are so
it's
much
100
further ahead.
likes, 100 comments, 100 people
100%.
sharing.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that is true.
it's true.
That is true.
A lot of times, that is far more influence than people that now have 2 million plus followers, where it's but would any of them actually show up to something you're doing? You start to get so big that you kind of lose the pinnacle of the community.
I actually saw a chart recently and it was talking about like ROI from companies, and it was like just a graph of like different stages of influencers.
Yeah.
And like the larger the following, the lower the ROI. And
Yeah.
like the ROI was highest on people with like 1,000 followers.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
Yeah, no, it is true.
Yeah.
And then your pet.
My pit is we tried to film the podcast last week
Ugh.
and we didn't have a cord and it didn't turn out.
Yeah, it was awful.
And we
The
just
stars
went
were
home.
aligning.
Yeah, it was awful. I literally drove an hour and a half down in traffic from Richmond Hill, got down there, and I was like so excited, and then it just didn't work out. Just didn't work out.
But it was just one of those days.
Yeah. Okay, I would say my peak. I'm going to Miami next weekend for our basil.
Love, I'll be there too.
Basil. Yeah, is that what it is? Our
Basil.
basil.
Yeah,
Okay. So it just like worked out because my girlfriends and I, we were supposed to do New York for Halloween. New York didn't work out, and then we're like, hey, let's go to Miami December 6th. And then we ended up looking at the dates. We're like, oh
Basil.
my God, it's Basil.
Oh, yeah.
Weekend. So we're like so excited. We've like already reached out to a few promoters, like just
Love.
trying to get our ins. But I'm super excited. I've never been to Miami.
Oh
I have
my
a few
God.
girlfriends, like the 3 other girls that I've been with have gone. So I'm super excited. We leave Wednesday night, come back Sunday morning. And then I'll finish off with my pit. I'm like stressed out about holiday financials, like gift giving, especially now that I'm older and like I have big girl money. I'm like, I want to put thought into gifts, but I'm like just calculating how much. Like, what am I going to drop $3,000 on gifts for like mom, dad, sister, boyfriend, like my boyfriend's parents that I'm like really close with? Like, and I'm like stressed out. And
Yeah.
like, and I'm going away for New Year's. It's just a lot.
It becomes a lot. It's like a really substantial time of year. And I do find too that sort of like lifestyle inflation happens. Like
I know.
as you start making more money and you're like, okay, but like I can afford the better,
I do
you
the
know,
same.
like
You're like, I can afford nice things. Like, I want to give my mom something nicer.
Well, you almost
Totally.
then feel bad for not getting
For
something
not.
nicer because
That's-
you're like,
because
I
you're like,
made
we
good
know I buy it
money.
for myself. So
But
like,
that's why, like, my mom's like, you've gone on 4 trips this year. Like, why am I getting $100 like candle? Like, and I know she would never say it, but
yeah.
I would. My
You're
mom would give
thinking
me the moon and the stars. So I'm like,
Yeah.
why would I not?
100%.
So I'm like stressed about it. But I actually
Yeah.
saw, it was funny. I saw this stat the other day. It said that it was like the average American. So I don't know what it would be to Canadian, but during Black Friday from September to beginning of December, it spends anywhere between $35,000 to $55,000 on like gifts just with sales
It's so
and
much.
thing. And it was like on I don't know what like news outlet it was. But it was
It's
saying it was
crazy.
anywhere between just like the sales starting so
Yeah.
early and people getting so overwhelmed with just like groceries and decorations and anything related
Even
to the
just
holidays.
travel, like
Yeah.
travel
Traveling.
Tuesday, like
Oh no, it's
Yeah.
a lot. And I even made a video about Travel Tuesday the other day, and I was like, you really have to be like cognizant of if it's worth it for you. Same with like Black Friday. Like as someone who obviously, you know, promotes products and consumerism in a lot of ways, I always say to people genuinely, and I think, you know, because as I've mentioned to you guys, like I've had, you know, my brother's gone through some health issues over the past couple of years that have just really like
perspective.
totally in a way where it's just like, you know, acceptance of the situation you have and gratitude for what you have is everything. Like if you don't have your health, you have nothing. And I think sometimes we think like, oh, like I'm gonna get that bag and it's gonna bring me the joy, or I'm gonna get that. And then you get a few of those things and you realize it doesn't change anything.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes just the like intentionality of what really brings me joy, like who are the people that really fill my cup? What are the things I use frequently all the time that like are a part of my lifestyle every day and not just like, you know, I'm going to wear this once.
Yeah.
I think it's just a good check-in with yourself. Cause I've had years where I'm just like, you check your credit card and you're like, like I am unhinged.
getting into your background and your career journey.
Yes.
How did you start, I guess, all of the things that you are doing now?
Yeah.
Let's start from the beginning.
So I started working one summer for this company called Startupfest. Phil, who is, you know, still one of my bosses, you know, 14 years later, and I had connected. I had actually like ended up kind of volunteering at an event my dad was speaking at. He had called me and said, hey, you know, my friend Phil had someone not show up to do registration. I was like 18 at the time. He's like, will you come? I was like, no, it's spring break in Miami. And he was like, get your butt over here. I was like, okay. So I just literally like was checking people in. I was like scanning badges at this conference in Miami. And I got to talking with Phil a little bit. And he was like, what are you doing this summer? Like, I'm kind of starting running this project. And flash forward, I ended up moving to Montreal that summer and working on building out kind of the early days of Startupfest, which was, maybe 600, 700 people at the time, and bringing together really the Canadian startup ecosystem. And I did everything from walking his dog to like sitting in meetings at Apple. And then when we were there, we kind of started conceptualizing the Elevator World Tour, which was the, unique ways to do pitch competitions, pre-Shark Tank, pre-Dragon's Den, any of that. And I was in university at the time, and I really wanted to like be a part of these things. So I kind of did a lot of my classes like remote. I would get Phil to like write a letter, and I'd be like, yeah, I'll show up for the exam. And we went and ran these Elevator World Tours in different cities. We did the Eiffel Tower in Paris. We did the CN Tower. We did the Azrieli Tower in Tel Aviv, ICC in Hong Kong. We would pick about 100 startups from those cities that were really, promising companies. And then I would work with those kind of different organizations and Phil's network to find angel investors who each wanted to kick in $10K to build out these $100,000 investment prizes. And we started kind of running these all over and getting a lot of traction, and that in turn grew Startupfest. And so when I graduated, I ended up doing that full time. And, Startupfest in its peak was, north of 8,000 to 9,000 people pre-pandemic. We're now just getting back there. Kind of since the pandemic. And then from that, we launched the biggest digital government conference too. So we bring together biggest companies in tech with public sector in both Canada, US, the 11 digital nations, and essentially teach the government how to become more tech savvy.
Wow.
Which is like very interesting and kind of random, honestly. And through that, I had always been kind of creating content probably since my early 20s on Instagram. And I had connected with my now business partners at Counterculture, Ash and Tara, through Instagram, actually. Years ago, I was maybe like 25, 26. I got a DM from Ash, and he was like, hey, we're running this program with Sky Vodka, and we're looking for someone in Calgary who like has a lot of Calgary followers. Can you get on a phone call? And we'd like followed each other through sneakers. And I remember him calling me and being like, hey, like this is the program, like whatever. And I was like, oh, like, okay, like it sounds kind of legit. Like, I don't know.
You're like, I'll drink the vodka.
Yeah, I was like, I drink Sky Vodka, like for sure. And I ended up doing this program, and there was actually 2 other male influencers on the program, and whoever like got the most contest entries won a trip to San Francisco.
Oh, so you popped off.
So I obviously was like committed to winning.
Watch
I
me.
was like, I'm gonna beat these boys, obviously.
Yeah, duh.
Won that, went to San Francisco. I feel like that campaign was maybe like a $6,000 campaign or something. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And through that, I really like developed a great friendship with Ash and Tara. And flash forward a couple years later, we ended up all kind of partnering to go more full time at the agency, which Tara had been running kind of independently herself at the time. Ash was senior at LG, and I transitioned my role at Startupfest to be more of like a fractional CMO type partnerships person. I love that team. I love still getting to work with them. I think they're like some of the smartest, most interesting people, but I just needed a shift.
Something else.
Yeah. So I kind of moved in that direction. And then.
So when you got into, I guess, Counterculture, that would have been like what year range would that have been?
2021 kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's been about 3.5, 4 years.
So when did you start growing your personal following?
I'd say my personal following, I started growing in like 2017-ish on Instagram.
Was influencers like a big thing at that point, or do you think it's like skyrocketed?
Yeah, it's totally skyrocketed. Like it was just, Instagram was really the only platform anyone was doing. YouTube, of course. And I had a really good girlfriend of mine in university, was like, fabulous beauty YouTuber, and she was doing a really great job. And I just really was kind of sharing all the cities I was in, and I was getting a lot of questions about recommendations because
like travel
my mom,
sort of stuff.
yeah, like travel stuff. My mom was a flight attendant, so I had flight passes. So when I wasn't traveling for Startupfest, I was always using my flight passes to try to like, I had a girlfriend who was living in London at the time, and I would just like, basically you just pay like the airport fees and like taxes. So I would just,
that's a good perk.
it was amazing. We call my mom the
Do you
queen
still
of the
get
perks.
that?
I do. They're much less. Like when you turn 25, your priority goes down.
Okay.
So like, I maybe use them like twice a year, but the flights have to be quite open for you to get on. But when I was like under 25, it's based on seniority, and my mom had worked for Air Canada for years, so I had pretty good seniority. And it was amazing. It was amazing. So I used it all the time. Like I was like, I'm embarrassed. I'm in London. I was like, get me on a plane. Like we'll go.
Out.
And so I actually launched city guides to like share a lot of the places that I would go. And that was kind of my first like real foray. The sneaker stuff kind of came secondary. I just like was wearing a lot of cool sneakers. My brother had always been really into sneakers. My ex-boyfriend at the time was very into sneakers, and we would be like in Japan or in LA or New York, and we were always like the sneaker stores. And so that was kind of a default. But yeah, it was like a very organic kind of growth for me.
I feel like sneakers back then was like such a thing, because I think back to when I was in like first year, second year, and oh my God, like that was my number one focus was to get like a pair of Jordans.
Totally.
I used to be obsessed with like the Jordan 4s, the metallic reds.
100%.
I was obsessed with those shoes.
Yeah.
And then I got the you know, like the black and orange ones.
Yeah.
Then I got those, and I was just like, I would wear those constantly.
Oh yeah, you're like, I need them.
Yeah.
And it's so funny how like the trends, like so many of those silhouettes are timeless silhouettes that will forever be. I always say like dunks are never out, because like dunks are one of the most iconic sneaker silhouettes. Like if you love wearing a dunk, wear a dunk. But it is so funny to see the stuff, like how much now the trends will shift, you know? Like,
and did you always like when you were like 15, 16, and like did you know you wanted to do something creative, or was it just like the conference that your dad, like do you think the opportunities kind of just aligned?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Like I always liked the creative stuff. Like I was always like collaging and like making home
movies. Because I think when you're younger, like you didn't have TikTok that like, like now I look at my little cousin, she's like, oh, I want to be on TikTok because like it's right there in your face and you're visualizing yourself doing it.
Yeah.
Like what was creative when you were younger? Like how?
Sometimes I think it just like comes to you though, because when I think back to when I was in like grade school and high school, and all my friends wanted like toys and whatever, or like electronics, and I wanted drones.
Yeah.
And I used to make my little drone videos and post them all over my Instagram all the time. And then I went to school for science, but it's funny how like I made my way back to like the filming side.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I just think it's like you just find it.
You find it. And I feel like, you know, my older brother has always been very, very creative.
He's
super creative. And we grew up in Calgary, which is a little more, you know, oil and gas, like a little bit regressive. And I remember my brother used to be like crocheting in the back of class. And like, he was wearing like LRG and like, just like, he was always shopping from Karmaloop, which like, I feel like some people might get the reference, might be a little young, but like Karmaloop was like the spot, and he was wearing like just bright, like cool clothes. And
for like a small town vibe.
He was just very, just like super creative. And he definitely like exposed me to a lot of those things, like very artistic, very like thinks very differently than I do, even to this day. You know, like I'm like a great reader, writing, like all of that stuff. My brother is like not at all, but he's like physics, building things. And so I think that was big for me. And I was always like collaging. I loved magazines. I loved like all of that stuff. But honestly, I think when I started working with Startupfest at a really young age and getting into this environment where people were so creative, but also just realizing that like, oh, you can kind of do whatever you want. Like I felt like in Alberta, it was like, this is what you do. And if you're going to do engineering, you're doing petroleum engineering, because oil and gas. And I realized there were all these people creating things. And when you realize that like the people who've built the structures in which we exist are no smarter than you or me or anyone, they're like, oh, I can really kind of do anything. And that was like so inspiring.
It's funny how you kind of started in like travel, I guess, social media, and you still do that, because your TikTok is a lot of travel advice.
It's so funny because I will always think like, this must not be very interesting to people. And then people are like, oh my God, I love that. Like, give us more, the packing list, the whatever. And I think I recognize that I travel a lot.
How much in like, I don't know if I want to say a month, but like a month would you travel?
I would say on average, I'm in Toronto probably a week of every month. So
favorite city in the world? What is it?
Oh, that's a really good question. My favorite place in the entire world is Tofino. Like it's just like surf town. I think it's the furthest western point in Canada. I absolutely love it. That always shocks people. I think they think I'm going to be like New York, like but I'm like such a water girl, and I love to just like be in solitude.
But you live in LA.
I don't know that I could like as much as I spend half of my time in LA right now, for sure. I don't know that LA is a place that like calls me for the long term.
I don't know if it really calls anybody. I
Yeah.
think like people fantasize LA, and even my boyfriend is like, we're gonna move to Pacific Palisades and we're
Yeah.
gonna do the thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe we could get a house there, but I don't know if it's like, I think it's different than what you think it is.
I think you have to really know who you are to have a good time in LA. I think that LA can be, like I broke my nose when I was like 13, and it doesn't really bug me, like I'm just like, yeah, like my nose is probably the least interesting thing about me, like whatever. And when I spend too much time in LA, I'll be like, I should get my nails done. Right? Like this is like,
Oh my God, yeah.
And
No,
like
I
it's
was there
just
in May, and I stayed at the one hotel
Oh,
up
yeah.
by the Equinox.
Yeah.
And we were at the Equinox one day, and I'm like, I can't work out here.
it's crazy.
Oh,
It's
it's
crazy.
crazy.
But I think
No.
what you realize too is like
Oh, that like doesn't seem real though.
it's a weird place. But I think the more time I spent there, you realize that like a lot of people that you look at, and you look at these people and you're like, oh my God, like your life looks so amazing, or you're so perfect, whatever. There's sometimes, and I'm generalizing, but like there's sometimes the least happy people that because when you're chasing certain things that you think are what will bring you happiness, you're like, oh, right, well, I got it, and I'm still not super happy.
Yeah.
So, but I'm definitely someone who, like, home to me is the people that I'm with far more than a place. Like, I don't feel super homesick. My best friends live all over, like Montreal, LA, Philly, Toronto. And so I'm just happy to be like where the people I want to
Yeah.
be are.
Yeah. That's fair.
Yeah.
No, I like that.
So when you got into counterculture,
Yes.
counterculture now, I have heard of it just because you guys roster like a lot of large influencers, but it's a small roster, isn't it?
Totally. It's actually the smallest part of our business is the influencer side. So
How many influencers do you guys have? If you're allowed to.
yeah,
disclose.
no. Full time on our roster, less than 15. I should probably know that answer off the top of my head. Like
Toronto based
12.
or
no. Toronto based, we have maybe three that are Toronto based. Who are awesome. And, and then we have some creators that I feel like are just like they're more niche in the markets they live in. So like we work with Liz Beecroft. She was a New York based psychotherapist. Her clients are NBA players, entertainers. She does a lot of like mental health programming for different brands. We just did a program with Adidas. She's done stuff with Meta this year. She was on Shaq's podcast. We represent this girl, Alyssa, who's out in Calgary. She's actually one of the top financial podcasters and authors in the country. So she does really, really fabulous content for like couples and their finances. In Toronto, we have Sid Wingold, you guys might know, who's awesome and like lovely and such a great example of how you can very much be yourself and still grow. Like she is so herself and so fun. She's the only person I know that will like put on her Karen costume and like walk down the street and is completely unfazed. Like she's just, and it's, so we work with a lot of people that are such awesome people that it's so exciting to see them get, the accolades they deserve because they're just like building cool things on the internet. But yeah, it is actually the smallest part of our business. So we also run influencer campaigns for different brands or agencies. Sometimes larger agencies will hire us to run programming for them.
Okay.
And then we also have a few clients on retainer that we do kind of full service e-com management, branding, everything. Seasons is one of them. You guys might have seen the really aesthetic diffusers.
Oh, I showed you the diffuser.
yes,
Yeah.
we were literally
That's
just
that.
talking
Yeah,
about
we're
it.
happy to get
I
you
put
guys
it on
some.
my gift guide.
Oh my God, we're happy to send you some. Yeah, we're the agency on record for Seasons. So like we work with brands like that, which is super fun. And we're
for brands, is
Yeah.
it you guys outreach, they find you, a mix of both?
We are, at the point right now, I would say, where we are intentionally boutique and we like it that way. We have a small team and we don't have aspirations to like have a 15-person team. It's been an amazing way for us to be able to work on the projects we love, leverage our team to do that, and work with brands that we really like. So we definitely have pitched to brands before or do like call for proposals and submit in RFPs, but typically the brands we work with now come to us and we see if there's an organic fit. And we're also pretty well known for like doing culturally relevant programming. So if brands want to do, an interesting campaign that is a little more grassroots, like we're great for that. And love to kind of consult on different like experiential things. We've done programs with Canada Goose and things like Creators Table. We also run a small platform called Guap, which is kind of our subscription-based creator community, because we get a lot of inbound from creators who I love to have conversations with creators. And so often I say to them, like, you don't need management, or at least you don't need it yet. You maybe just need some support on how to best price yourself, how to structure deals. So we bring people into this community, and then they have direct access to our team as well. So Guap is something we're excited about that we like don't advertise a ton, but is a really cool kind of way to.
Is it new?
We've been kind of slowly doing it over the past like 8 months, I would say. It's something that's just like been a natural pipeline for us when there's creators that, we'd love to work with, but A, we don't have the bandwidth to support them properly, and B, they just like don't fully need management.
Okay,
so it's a great way to be like, hey, you can speak to our team directly. You have direct access in Slack. We'll do lunch and learns with brands.
Because I think a lot of people are like, there's a lot of questions that are just not, they can't get the answers to. So then to have like a portal or something from an agency that they really admire, I think is
totally,
because it opens up a conversation for things that you can't just Google online. Like we talk about rates and stuff, or just charging and just getting into the influencer industry ourselves, and like no one really talks about it.
No one talks about it, because
people
even for
are really,
myself, like I had to come up with my rates out of thin air and basically go from there and
then we
tweet.
found out that she was like severely
undercharging.
We were like, no. I was like, raise your rates like now.
Now we're good. But even like I have a couple clients that pay like what I thought a couple months ago was way too high. And apparently it's not. And I have like girls messaging me all the time being like, what are your rates? Like, what should I charge? And I'll openly tell people what I charge, because like, I wish somebody told me.
Totally. And I think a lot of times too, there's a lot of like misconceptions in the industry where I'll hear sometimes from like one of our girls, they'll be like, well, this person's charging this. And I'm like, they may have gotten that one time from a brand. But one of the things that like we take pride in with our creators is long-term relationships. I'm like, it is very easy to get the first check with anything, with brand partnerships, with vendor, like it's easy to get the first check. It's very hard to get the second. And I would way rather get one of our creators in at a $7,000 deal that the brand feels comfortable with, that they know will perform well, that we build a great relationship, and get 4 of them, than get them in at a $15,000 deal that it's like, okay, great. Well, I'm glad you got the check one time. The brand feels like they overspent. You feel like you don't know why they're not doing that. And so I think sometimes we always say too, like, we don't do standardized media kits for our creators. We have like a place where you can go to see all their demographics and their stats, but their rates do fluctuate in terms of, if it's a Canadian small business, we're not going to charge what I'm charging Sephora, and I think that sometimes too, there needs to be that flexibility. Like I so often still love to like personally work with brands that I know don't have the check to, pay what I would charge some large corporation, and that's okay. And I think it's important to like discern that as well, because that's how you build long-term relationships with people,
I think even with sponsors that we work with for House of Movement, we have started like locking in longer term partnerships.
That's been our biggest thing for our events, and that's something that we're like super proud of. Is Elise has done like a great job of like pitching ourselves to brands and really like explaining kind of like the problem that we're trying to solve here in Toronto, and like the solution that House of Movement offers, and why it's beneficial for the both of us to have. And we've been able to secure like 3-6 month long-term sponsors instead of like one really cool event. But then we have another event down the line, and like now what? But now we're like set up for like
and then eventually the goal would be to then like monetize it. So then like we would charge the brands. But like we're kind of at a point where we're like in between right now. So within the next few months, like I would assume that we would start charging these brands. But I think like,
but that's important though, that like you mentioned it, because that's something that we're like really trying to pride ourselves on, is like you can't just be a one and done type of thing, because then you just have
then you run out.
You have no resume. You have nothing to show for yourself.
Your reputation really precedes you, like I think that so often people get hung up on being like, well, I won't do it unless I get paid, and there's definitely a line, where it's like, okay, like so this doesn't make my rent, I've got bills to pay. But I do think that there is a line of like understanding where people are at, and We've had the great fortune of like being able to work with so many creators that we've been able to pay their fees to, because we've worked with the brands that have been able to, that when I'm doing a launch with Combinace and we're sending out shoes, I send to a lot of these women with zero expectation. I'm like, I would love to get these in your hands. I think it'd be exciting. And I think because of that, people are like, I'm so happy to support, like, no problem. And I think it's just thinking more long-term. Like, so often people are like, I want that check. And it's like, right, but look at your long-term objectives. And you guys will certainly very soon be at a place where it's like, right, but we've built this community. And if you guys would like to be able to use our mailing list or communicate with them directly through XYZ, these are those tiers of pricing. And now you've created a media property, like that has so many avenues for monetization that you've just built intentionally by including the right brands without nickel and diming in the early days. I think it'll really pay off for you.
Well, I think something we have also started transitioning into is, because we both do marketing, like I'm freelance and she's more on the corporate side. So we like kind of know different things. We have like toggled along the line of like maybe offering marketing services or like branding services and stuff. So sometimes our payment towards like a brand that's like non-monetary payment would be just through UGC. Yeah. So like if we, really want this brand for 3 to 6 months and we feel like it's really beneficial, but they're kind of iffy, we're like, okay, we'll throw in UGC.
Include smart. Yeah. Cause you're like, honestly, it's low lift on our end. We're happy to do it. Like, figuring out how you can bulk up those deals is everything. Like I so often will, we'll look at creators that have multiple avenues, and a brand will reach out for something and maybe they don't have the budget to hit with that, one certain thing, but it's like, okay, well, what if we included podcast in this? What if there's this opportunity that they're doing at this event? Can we include it? Like looking at things more holistically, because so often brands have budgets in buckets, right? And it's like, okay, well, my bucket's empty, but like if we can do it over through this person's bucket, I can get a little bit more from events,
Smart.
And so figuring out like
be calculating
totally
where you allocate your stuff.
And I think the easiest thing, like what I always come back to when we're negotiating for influencers, when I'm negotiating for Startupfest, any partnerships, it's about understanding everyone's objectives. Like I love to sit down with Brandon and be like, what does success look like to you? What are your KPIs? What does your team measure you on? And they'll be like, I want signups for this program, or I want whatever it is. Okay, great. Well, here's how we best feel we can help you meet those. Yeah. Easy. Like I think so often people are guessing. Like it's like, well, is this, and we have creators who are way better for brand awareness than they are for conversion. It's like if you guys have, EMV as your biggest mark of success, you want that earned media value to be high. Great. Let's work with this creator because you're going to get insane numbers on views and engagement, but perhaps not directly on conversion. And so I think it's just people sometimes miss the step of being like, what are your objectives here? Because then we'll probably build a longer term relationship naturally.
Do you think like brands sometimes miss that and they'll just get fixated on a certain influencer based off of like a status, and then they don't actually know what they can offer? So like you saying like how you will do your best to like be a matchmaker and pair influencers with the right brands, so it's a win-win for everybody. Yeah. Do you think that brands are like, I want her based off of just what we see on social media, but then she might not be a best fit? Does that happen sometimes?
I also think, and we've seen this happen over the years, I think that sometimes brands miss the mark on cultural relevancy. Okay. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes brands partner with someone because they see just numbers, like they're like, this is going to perform, but maybe they're missing how that creator is perceived by their community, actually. I'll use the Eras Tour as a great example. I think that some brands would have seen greater success by going to an influencer who's maybe already been to the Eras Tour.
Oh my God.
And
I spoke about this with a
girlfriend. And I'm so happy for those people that got to go multiple times. Like, I'm just saying, in theory, I think what could have been interesting is, let's say you've been a couple times and a brand approaches you. Imagine if you went to that brand and you said, hey, I would love to share this opportunity with one of my followers. I'm happy to share that experience online. I'm happy to share how we did that. But I think it would reflect better on the brand and on me, honestly, if I got to share this with someone in my community. And I think that sometimes brands miss the mark on what your objective of the campaign actually is, because I don't know that you bringing 7 influencers that have already been to the show was necessarily the greatest mark. I will say one of our creators went with a brand that I felt approached it really well because they brought her as more of a thank you for the work that we've done together and excited to continue the relationship without some big like PR experience around it. And I thought that was just like a tasteful approach for them because it left a really great taste in her mouth. It felt authentic. It felt like a
genuine.
And I think too, you know, a lot of the times when I look at my girlfriends that work at certain brands and we'll have these conversations too, they're like, look, you know, I need earned media value. I need the certain amount of impressions. So maybe this creator isn't my number one pick, but I know they're going to post 15 times today. So like that checks a box for me. And a lot of times that's it. You know, I think of a lot of the interesting people I like to follow on the internet and, you know, I'll see them do something and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Like they certainly didn't do like a ton of coverage for that or, you know, and it's like, a lot of brands don't love that. Like brands still have KPIs that they need to meet. And so I think that there is a balance there for sure of brands being like, maybe this isn't my top pick, but like I need coverage. So if that person's going to really thirst for it, like I'm in.
Well, I know
I even had the call today with a brand that is in Sephora and we're working with them for House of Movement.
Yeah.
And they wanted to be like a sole sponsor for one of their upcoming launches for one of our events.
Yeah.
And I was like, great, like that's a great idea. And they were like, can we host it with influencers? And I said no, because our whole brand of House of Movement,
it would look so bad on our part if we were just like, hey, girls of Toronto, we're actually just going to do Toronto, like influencer base.
Yeah.
And what I said to her on the call, I was like, if I'm being honest, I think you will benefit more from a community event as opposed to an influencer event. Because as much as there are influencers with that cult following and they have, you know, the pull, a lot of the influencers get stuff for free, so they're not going to be your customers.
Totally.
The community is going to be your customer.
Absolutely.
So if you can get girls in and trying the products and loving it and talking to them, they're the ones who are going to go to Sephora and buy it.
100%. And they're the ones who end up like talking about it all the time. One of my favorite things to do with Common Ace is like we send shoes all the time to everyday women. Like my toxic trait actually is like running and someone will be like, oh my God, like you're the sneaker girl or something. And I'll be like, send me your address. We'll send you shoes. And my team's like, Katherine, stop doing that. And I'm like, whatever.
Like, babe, you sent out like a little too many this
like I'm like, oh, another pair of shoes. But like, that's so much more exciting to me. You know, we ran an event last year with a good friend of mine, Dave, who's a fabulous footwear designer, called Creators Table. And I went to Canada Goose and I was like, hey, I'm really inspired by, you know, one of the guys I've worked with at Startupfest forever, Alistair. He fabulous, like serial founder, author, amazing. And he runs something every year called Bit North, where he brings 30 people that he's met that year in interesting places together, usually to a chalet in Quebec. And everybody gives a 5-minute talk on something unrelated to what they do for work. I went to my first Bit North when I was like 25. It was the coolest thing in the world to me.
So
I was like,
talk about?
I actually spoke about comparing the sneaker industry to the drug trade because I didn't work in sneakers at all at the time, so I was allowed. And I then since then have become the sneaker plug for that community of tech founders for sure. But it was so exciting to me. And I was like, oh my God, the only reason I got in this door is because of Alistair, but I loved it. And so I wanted to run my own version of it last year. So I went to Canada Goose and I was like, hey, you know, I know that you guys are kind of pushing the footwear angle. We're going to bring in 30 people who are interested in footwear, not influencers, like journalists, designers, you know, to me, the most influential people that don't really share it online. And it was so fun because all of those people got really fabulous PR boxes with like the Glacier Trail sneaker and coats and everything. And they were so excited. Like they opened it and they were like, oh my gosh, like this is so amazing because they don't get PR every day.
That's what made me with Codally.
Yeah. And it's like,
oh my God.
It's so much cooler, you know, and it's not to say that I don't love working with influencers and love working with creators because so many of them are still very grateful for what they have and stuff. But it is really exciting to get to share those opportunities with like the everyday awesome people that are just like, this is cool, right? Like you guys haven't lost touch with the fact that like, this is crazy that this is our jobs.
Yeah. I know definitely we're going to get a question for like the people that you guys work with, the influencers on your roster. How do you guys select that? How does someone apply? Do you reach out? Like, I definitely know someone will be interested. Maybe someone looking for management, looking for a mentor. How do you guys go about kind of selecting and like really representing?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. We've definitely had creators that we've reached out to over the years that we've brought in that are usually kind of early in their creator career. I think that's something we kind of take pride in. I always say it's very easy to see someone who's like already making a ton of money and growing some big community to be like, hey, we'll manage you. But I think it's more of a testament when you see people who are like creative and doing something interesting. And you're like, I like him. Like he's going to do something. So we try and keep our eye out for that type of thing. We do get quite a bit of outreach, and we'll try and, have conversations with people. And a lot of the times they're early days. Like we have creators reach out who are signed to another agency perhaps, and they share a lot of the grievances. Yeah. And we run things very differently. We have no clause that locks creators in. We're not in the business of like making people work with us if they're not happy, or vice versa. There's a lot of agencies that make you buy out of your contract or things like that. We try and wrap up things clean and like always wish people well. But for us, that's just like not really the type of business we want to run. And additionally, we run everything really transparently. I think because Tara and myself are creators as well. So like all of our roster gets their own email that they can just log into. It forwards to our team, but they can just log in. They see all their emails come in. They have full transparency, because for me, like I want to know that my emails are getting answered. Like, yeah. And I would say 90% of agencies, you don't see any of them. It's just like, oh, I'm not sure. Like my manager got it. Or
so it's funny that you talk about. So I work, like Elise said, corporate marketing, and we're meeting with a client, and we were asking about their Google ad budget. Yeah. And they had said to us, they're like, honestly, like, I don't know. You're going to have to talk to my agency, because like they have all that information. Yeah. And like, so we asked them, we're like, why don't you know? They're like, oh, like they just want to handle it. Like we're like not allowed to see it basically. Yeah. So it's like, I didn't know that. Like I thought if you were under an agency, it would be like, there wasn't going to be like a wall between you and the agent, but I guess that does happen.
No,
so it's good that you, like as an agency, you guys, there's full transparency, and it's open and honest conversations with the brand deals that come in and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And I think for us, like what I find the thin red thread is, I love working with people who are doing interesting things offline and just have chosen to share it on the internet. And that's like with zero judgment to people who are, whatever.
Full-time
like,
online?
Yeah, and not even that, because a lot of our creators are full-time creators, but they're doing interesting things with their lives. I think sometimes it's easy to get sucked into feeling like everything you're doing is just to create content, and that's not creating an actual holistic life or like fulfilling as a human. So I think that that's really important. Like I love, Liz is someone we worked with for years. I think so highly of her, because she has a full caseload of like patients that she sees all the time. And then she shares a lot of mental health content, connecting the dots between sports and mental health and fashion. And, it's so cool. I'm like, how interesting that you're like building this and sharing it online. And, I look at someone like Sid, who I mentioned earlier, such a fabulous entertainer, like she writes all of her own sketches, like she'll send in concepts for things. I'm like, in what world did you come up with that? Like what? Yeah. Like, she's a talent on screen. I'm like, I'd love to, that girl's gonna have her own show one day, and I can't wait to see it, So yeah, I think that that's something that and for me, I also am like, I look for good people. Like at the end of the day,
like on and off screen.
Totally. My whole like ethos is building cool things with smart people. That's how I like to spend my time and describe everything I do. And I'm like, we're a team with anyone we work with. Like, I want to feel like people are well-intentioned with good attitudes and like, grateful for the opportunities they get and all of those things. And, the vast majority of creators for sure are. And there's like, an underlying amount in every market that definitely you're like, okay, maybe we need to like touch grass. Like this is a pretty fortunate way to spend your time.
You're friends with your partners, right?
Yeah. And they're married to each other.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Ash and Tara are married to each other, and they're like two of my best friends in the world. So I think
another question people would ask, and I feel like people ask myself and Dom this, is like, what is your biggest struggles like working with friends?
I think that there's a couple things. You have to be able to separate your friendship and the business sometimes. Like we've had hard conversations over the years that you have to be able to have. And at the end of the day, I love them as my best friends, always, regardless of whatever else will ebb and flow. I think that the pros will always outweigh the cons for me. So I love working with my best friends, because like what's more fun than getting to do cool stuff with your best friends? Yeah. But I do think that like honest communication is really important. Like you have to be able to sometimes hit those moments where it's like, hey, like, you're not holding up your end of the deal. And we both had those conversations where it's like, hey, like we said we're going to do this, and like, Fish, what are you doing? You know? And also understanding like, it's almost like a marriage in a lot of ways. Like now, Tara and I really like run the agency together. And when I've had things going on in my personal life or she has and stuff, it's like catching each other when you need to, you know, like I've been dealing with stuff with my family over the past little while. And even today I was just like trying to do things. And she was like, just cancel your meetings. Like it's,
She's like, I got
you know,
you.
It's all good. And so I think, that's one of the best parts of working with your friends is like just an understanding of humanness, but you really have to make sure that you respect each other, like at its core. It's like a relationship. Like as long as you respect each other, the rest can work itself out.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Because I think it can be challenging, especially because you don't want to blur that line between when you close the laptop off and like you can't look at the other person in front of you. And like for anyone that works with a significant other or mom or dad, like whatever relationship it is, you want to make sure that when like 5 o'clock hits, when you like clock off, you're like, okay, we're good.
We're done.
And you can like communicate and talk through things and not let it affect. Because I can even imagine like working with a spouse, like that can be like your like your partners,
boyfriend
like that
does
can be
similar work to me.
Yeah.
And that's like a hard line. Like we do not work together.
Totally. And I mean, I have great respect for Ash and Tara. I feel like you guys should have Tara on the podcast one time and she can dive into that. Because they have managed to build a company together. You know, we work on multiple projects all together. And they would be the first ones to tell you that like you have to have clear boundaries and like, but at the end of the day, like they both respect each other and they're both really good at complementary things, which I think is awesome, you know? And I think that that's also important in your friends. Like Tara is so creative and like so talented in so many ways that I'm like, Tara, can you help me? Like when we relaunched Common Ace, you know, even if I had like all the budget in the world, I still would have gone to Tara to do like all of our branding and brand book and everything because she just has like such an incredible eye. She's so like intentional with the design choices she makes and she knows me so incredibly well. So I think it's really important too when you have like complementary skill sets to like let people shine as they do.
So talking about skill sets, we get a lot of people are always just asking us how we got into marketing. What would you say for someone that wants to work for an agency, wants to get into a creative field?
Or even just like starting up, like advice, like for us even that are starting this company, but also like hustling on the side just for like income purposes.
Yeah.
What would be like pieces of advice that you would give for that?
I think, you know, number one, your relationships are everything. I worked with this guy at Microsoft, you know, almost a decade ago now. I was telling this story actually the other day in New York, and it made me think of what he had said. He told me that your relationships are absolutely everything. He gave a talk one time about how he was named like the #1 guy to know in New York City in the startup scene, because whenever he would be on a plane or anything, he would reach out to 50 people or 20 people, like however long the time would permit, and reach out to people when you don't need anything from them.
Reach out in a way as like checking in.
Totally.
Or
add value. You know, I think some of the things that have helped me the most over the past like 5-10 years has been supporting people genuinely. Like when a friend launches a business or something, I'm buying that from them. When someone is doing something exciting, I want to share that from them. I want to reach out and see how I can add value. Like give more than you take in everything that you do. It comes back to you tenfold. And I think so often, especially when you're in your 20s and stuff, you sometimes feel like someone else's success takes away from yours. And the sooner you realize that like, it doesn't, like there's enough room at the table for everyone. I've always been like, why wouldn't I want my best friends to be like so smart, so successful, so cool? Like, what do I want to have like duds, you know, like not at all. And you will have people where it's like, I feel like you're not happy for me.
Oh,
like
we've been there.
And that's normal, you know, but I always say like, nobody who's in the arena has any time to like, look at what you're doing. You know, the only people that are passing judgment are people who are not happy in their own lane. So I think that's like the biggest thing is just like give more than you take and add value, because now so often like someone will reach out to me who I haven't spoken to in years or like never engages on anything I do. And they're like, hey, can you do whatever? I'll probably do it because I'm happy to help. But like, I'm way more happy to help someone who I'm like,
a relationship,
hey, like it's great. Yeah. And I just feel like I'm now at a place where I'm able to authentically reach out to people and be like, hey, I'm doing this thing and I'd love to, and they'll pick up the phone, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that that's really, really important and it's also like, be super nice to people because I actually, years ago, there was a role open at Startupfest and this girl had applied. And when I thought back to like my high school experience, she was just like the one girl that I was like,
oh, you knew
she
her.
just wasn't. Yeah. And she applied to work for this role that I was hiring for at
It just
Startupfest.
rubbed you the wrong way.
And I remember sitting with Alistair, who I worked with, and looking at him and being like, I need you to gut check me. Because this girl applied and she, you know, is essentially like qualified for the role. But I was like, she just honestly like was not super nice to me in high school. Like I can like remember, and he was like, that's the game of life, baby. And he just like ripped it up. He was like, yeah, no. Like, I think it's just so important to like be really nice to people and work really hard.
I will say that House of Movement and just putting myself online has made me really be more mindful of the persona, how I act when I'm out with family, with friends, boyfriends, meeting like with my boyfriend, meeting new people, because like it's been actually really sweet. The both of us have like gone out and people have like recognized us from online and like it doesn't happen often, but when it does, like, and they're like, oh my God, like we've been to your event or we've seen your podcast and like we just love it. You guys are so sweet. Like hearing that recognition, like, or when I go out, like it's been so rad. I've been like on Ossington and like at dinner, like my waiter's been like, are you like from that? And I'm like, oh my God, yeah. And she's like, you're so like it means so much. And I really do see the value in like the longevity of your kindness and how charismatic you are and just how nice of a person, because I know down the line I may need someone or I may need something from a certain someone, and I would hate to be that person that's like, oh no, like don't go to her, like she's just rude.
I forget the term my boyfriend uses, but he always says like keep it something, but it's like basically like do not end with anybody on bad terms, because like you don't know, like if 10 years down the line, like you don't want them saying anything.
And the thing is too, no matter what, there's gonna be people that don't like you, you know, 100%. And that's okay. Like I, as a chronic people pleaser, I'll be like, why? Like I try to be so nice to everyone. Like, I don't know. And that's okay. You know, like you just can't make everyone happy. But my dad always used to say like, you know, use the judge test. Like if you are about to like make a decision or something, think about going to the person that you respect the most in your life and having to explain to them the decision that you made and why. As long as like you can feel good about that, like you're fine. You know, and I think it's just about like, if you sleep easy at night with how you treat people and how you like, keep it moving. No matter what, people are going to have something to say, but like, that's all you can control.
And then just one other thing. For someone like a junior marketer, someone that wants to get into a junior role, like applying to your agency, what is something, because I know it's such a saturated field. And when I was trying to get into a junior marketing role, like just applying on LinkedIn, I would see 100 applicants, 150 applicants. Like,
that's why
what makes someone stand out? Like what would make you guys want to extend the role to a junior marketer or someone wanting to get into the creative field?
Even like startup influencers, like girls who have between, you know, 1 and 10,000 followers, who that number is just not moving. In such like a saturated space, like any advice that you would even give to that?
So I think on the like, if you're looking to work in an agency, depending on what aspect of it interests you the most, I think that like networking is huge. I think so often people underestimate the power in just like reaching out to someone. I said this to a girl that I had a drink with last week. You know, I think people assume that like 25 people reach out to you every week to be like, hey, can I pick your brain? And like, they really don't, you know? Like I have months where I probably get like more young women reaching out to me than others, but 9 out of 10 times if someone's like, hey, like, do you have time for like a virtual coffee chat or something? I'm happy to, because people did that for me so often. And like, I think that can really help you. If I meet someone who's great and ambitious, like I'm happy to, maybe we don't have an opportunity that's right, but I have a lot of friends in brand space, agency space, tech space that I'm like, I'm happy to connect you. The girl that worked with me this summer on Combinace, she came up to me in Reformation. I like was literally shopping. She was like, I love your agency. I love your journey. I'm looking for something this summer. And I wasn't really hiring at the time. And she was just like really on it, kept reaching out. And I was like, I respect your hustle. So I think that just like showing intentional interest, definitely taking the time to understand what an agency or brand actually does. Like I find so often all people reach out and they'll be like, I love to travel and I love shoes. And I'm like, that's amazing. Sort of has nothing to do with like what my actual day-to-day is like or what makes us all money, but like, you know, love that we can connect on that outside. So I think that's important. I do also think that some type of technical skill is always a great asset to have. I think so often now everybody's like, I love to be on social media. I love
and
to.
like I can use Canva, but I think that there's a little bit more.
It's like, okay, like, are you proficient in Adobe Suite? Do you know Figma really well? Are you?
Funny enough, I just spent the past month learning Figma.
Yeah.
Let me just say, anyone that knows Figma, like, applaud to you.
Totally.
It is so hard.
It's hard,
My
but it's
job
stuff
made
like
me
that
learn
that's
it,
super
yeah.
helpful, right? And so I think that that's really important. Like if you do have an interest in some type of like technical skill, I think it's great. Like paid social is a fabulous place to be into. And then on the influencer side, I think so much of it is about like your perseverance. I say to people all the time that if you just go online to be an influencer because you want to be an influencer, you likely won't find success. I have girlfriends that like have never made content in their lives and they'll be like, maybe I should like be an influencer. Like the money's good. And I'm like, the people that are successful on the internet enjoy creating content and they are like creative people. You have to go back to your why, you know, like I have always made internet content because it's fun for me. It's a creative outlet. I enjoy that community. And I think that when you see that in someone, you can tell. And I think the last piece for influencers that like bring me such joy is, you know, I created content on TikTok for years before like my TikTok kind of took off. And the only thing that I felt made the difference was when I was just myself. Like we spend so much time looking at what works for other people and thinking like, okay, well, like that really works for her. So I'm gonna make that same video. But no matter what, like it's not you, you know, like that's not you. And so I think the moment that you lean into yourself and like your personality, what you genuinely like, you will find success. Like your community exists. I say to creators all the time, I'm like, I don't care if you like dogs playing chess. There are tens of thousands of other people that love that too, you know, like be yourself. And as cheesy as it sounds, like that's the key.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's podcast. Thank you, Katherine, for being our guest. Where can everybody find you?
You can find me on socials at BGKJ or you can follow us on Combinates for all of your sneaker and sneaker.
I love it.
I love it. Okay, thank you. We'll talk to you guys soon.